Are you okay? Rachel yelled out as she ran toward me through the storm, trying not to laugh. It figures that moving day would find lightning, thunder, and rain attacking us from above. But it had been completely clear when we headed this way with a truckload of all our worldly possessions. I'm good, I called out, chuckling to myself as I lay on the ground with thick raindrops splashing me in the face. Honestly, I had no idea how I ended up there on the flat of my back. I volunteered to brave the storm to get the door to our new home unlocked, to save my wife from getting overly soaked. I planned to get the lights turned on too, as the sky had grown quite dark when the bottom fell out only minutes before we arrived. Rachel was 5 months pregnant, and I was hoping to make things as convenient as possible. Her back had been throbbing pretty badly lately, and the move was taking quite a toll on her. The new house was massive. My wife and I had decided it was time for us to move out of our apartment in the city and upgrade to a house in a more peaceful environment as soon as we found out we were expecting. We had been married for a little over a year, but it was a surprise to both of us when the test showed positive. We had been talking a lot about trying to conceive but hadn't planned on taking the plunge just yet. While we had hoped to be a little more financially stable by the time we brought a new member into our little family, I can't say we weren't excited about it. After looking at a handful of houses for a few months, we instantly fell in love with this one. We did not doubt that there would be an ice cube's chance in the depths of Satan's asshole that we could afford it. But we asked for more details regardless. The price we paid was a little higher than our budget, but it was a remarkable deal for the size of this place. Rachel and I made a decent living between the two of us, but we couldn't have dreamt of owning a house like this, even with our combined income. Given the incredible and somewhat bewildering price tag, I made sure to do my research before we signed off on it. I'm sure we've all heard the tales of the surprisingly priced houses that just happened to have been the location of a brutal and bloody massacre. As it turned out, our new home had only been built a few months back, making us its first owners. No history, no tragedies, and no skeletons in the closet. I even looked up the land it was built on, halfway expecting to find it sat upon an ancient burial ground. But there was nothing much to speak of on that front either. Given the storm raging outside, we decided to hold off on unloading anything until the weather cleared up. I had called in a few favors to help us with the move, but they had headed out to grab some food before meeting back up with us. By the time our friends arrived, things had simmered down substantially outside, so we began the tedious and back-breaking process of unloading the truck. It took some time, but we had everything inside by around 10. We were all pretty beat by the time the whole ordeal was done with, so we decided to just crash for the night and worry about setting everything up the following day. We bid our friends good night with a healthy amount of gratitude before we turned in for the night. It was probably around 3 in the morning when the knocking woke me up. It almost sounded like someone was jerking on the door handle, trying to get in. "You hear that?" I asked Rachel before turning to see she was still in a deep sleep. I gently slid out of the bed, attempting to make my way through the new and unfamiliar house in the dark. It took some groping around the walls to make my way downstairs, almost causing me to bust my ass a few times over our shoddily stacked boxes. But I finally arrived at the foot of the stairs. Our new home stood alone on about 4 acres. There wasn't much life around, and the absence of any streetlights outside left the vast living room hidden behind the shadows of the night. I stood on the ground floor landing, just listening for a few moments. Only silence, not so much as a creak or two from the house settling down for the night. Giving up on my fruitless search for answers, I shook my head before yawning widely. "Yep, I'm going nuts," I whispered to myself as I made my way back up to the bedroom. The next day was mostly taken up by arranging our furniture and pushing aside the boxes we would be storing between the loft and the basement. That would be a task for another day, as our priorities were on getting the house to feel like a home. After another few days, we were feeling pretty cozy, and it was time for the grueling process of packing away the non-essentials. As I was awkwardly carrying boxes up the ladder to store them in the attic, I found myself impressed by the size of the room. It appeared twice or even 3 times the size of the storage area in my parents' house.
Having moved from an apartment, we didn't have much experience with rooms such as these. I couldn't speak to whether this was an unusual size for a loft, but I was not surprised given the size of the house itself. "God damn it!" I yelled out after tripping over an uneven floorboard with both arms gripped around the base of the boxes. "You okay, babe?" Rachel called out from the opening behind me. "Yeah, nothing hurt but my dignity." I laughed while rolling to the side and gathering up the boxes that now lay splayed open on the floor. She was giggling pretty well when she caught sight of me after ascending the ladder to the room I now knelt in, gathering spilled memories off the floor. "What did you trip over?" Rachel asked, still chuckling. "I have no idea," I replied, still reloading the boxes. "Looks like a loose floorboard," she said, nudging the raised edge with her foot. After gathering myself back up from the floor, I took a look at the slight lip that had tripped me onto my ass. It looked like a long and wide single sheet of plywood. The rest of the floor in this room was made up of 2x4s, so the large chunk of thin wood seemed quite out of place. I climbed back down the ladder to the second floor below and dug a long screwdriver out of my tool bag, which would be headed to the basement later that day. After returning to where my wife still crouched beside the unusual section of flooring, I jammed the flathead driver into the seam and pried up the sheet of wood. "What the hell?" Rachel said, looking down at the floor. "Beats me," I shrugged, staring at the door that was recessed into the floor of the attic. We were puzzled over the reasoning behind installing a second opening in the loft, besides the one that had the fold-out ladder we had scaled in the first place. Though it was a far bigger room than I had expected to see when we climbed the steps, I couldn't understand why a second entryway would be provided, especially in the form of a wooden door that would normally stand upright. Upon closer inspection, and a quick jaunt back downstairs to compare, it could not be denied that this was of the same style as the front door that led into our new home. "Open it up," Rachel suggested while I just looked at it, scratching my head. "Stand back then," I suggested. The last thing I wanted was for either of us to fall to the floor below, especially my very pregnant wife. The door had a regular knob with a deadbolt lock above it. I unlatched them both and pulled the door ajar. "Huh?" I said, looking at my wife, then back to the floor. "What the hell is the point of that?" Rachel replied, staring down at the wooden floorboards beneath the open door. It wasn't until I closed the strange door back shut and began to slide the plywood back over it that I noticed the small text written on the top right corner of the door. "For when they come, Booper," I read out loud after leaning over to make out what it read. "When they come?" Rachel asked. "No clue." As we headed back to the functional attic door, I noticed another unusual aspect of this room. There was a thick metal bar attached to the brackets on the ceiling. It had a heavy-looking chain hanging from it that was looped back around it with a hefty hook. On top of that, when I was descending the ladder to exit the storage space, there was a steel hoop protruding from the backside of the door that hung down behind the ladder currently. "Safe room, maybe?" Rachel suggested. "Attic seems a strange place for a safe room," I chuckled, shrugging off the chain and assuming the bizarre door to nowhere to be some kind of bizarre practical joke on the part of those who constructed the building. I went back to gathering up boxes for storage. On my second trip, I gave another glance at the oddly located door, sliding the plywood back over it. I just nudged the screwdriver to the side for the time being, before turning my attention back to the task at hand. My wife and I went on about the rest of our day, stashing things between the basement and the attic, but I could not shake the image of the strange door. My mind kept wandering back to it whenever I found myself sitting still for a moment. As we approached the end of our first week in the enormous 5-bedroom house, the majority of our settling in was over. Sure, we'd rearrange things here and there should we feel the urge, but our grueling and busy move was finally done with. Rachel and I had both taken 2 weeks off from our respective jobs, so we had plenty of time to enjoy some peace before we had to get back on any manner of schedule. As much as I loved our new home, there was one aspect of living here that did trouble me. Every night since being here, I still occasionally found myself awakened by the same knocking sounds that jerked me awake on our first night. It wasn't every night, mind you, just here and there, but always around 3 in the morning. It could be that it would still occur every night.